"You'll never amount to anything," my father said, his voice dripping with disdain as he looked at me from across the room. His words hung in the air, raw and heavy, like the stale scent of cigarettes that clung to his old armchair. I glanced down at my hands, remembering something he didn't know. There was a letter tucked safely in my pocket, its crisp edges brushing against my skin. It was from Grandpa. I had found it a few days ago, hidden away in a dusty old box in his attic. Inside, his familiar scrawl traced over the faint lines of the paper, detailing something that had changed everything. My parents never really took the time to understand Grandpa. To them, he was just an old burden, someone to be dealt with, pushed aside. They claimed the nursing home was the best option for him, citing reasons like professional care and constant supervision, but I knew the truth. It was convenience, pure and simple. I had argued, of course, but what weight did my voice carry? What was I against the flood of their insistence? So, against my protests, they filed the necessary papers, and soon, Grandpa was gone from the home he had lived in all his life. After Grandpa passed away, I was the one who sorted through his things. My parents had no interest in the task. They wanted to sell the house as quickly as possible and be done with it. While they were absorbed in their own worlds of real estate agents and potential buyers, I found solace in the quiet, creaking rooms of Grandpa's old house. As I sifted through memories, carefully wrapping up fragile heirlooms and flipping through photo albums, I stumbled upon that letter. Somehow it had escaped my mother's frenzied decluttering. Grandpa had left me a message, a legacy. His letter hinted at a hidden part of the house, a place that even my father had never known about. What lay behind that secret door could change everything. But for now, I was the only one who held this secret, and I intended to keep it that way. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I discovered a truth buried deep within walls. A truth my parents were too blind to see. A truth that Grandpa had entrusted to me, and me alone. Grandpa's house had always been a place of refuge for me. As a child, I would spend entire summers there, losing myself in its labyrinth of rooms and forgetting the tensions that simmered at home. The house was filled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread and a blend of fragrant teas that Grandpa always prepared. I could still hear his gentle hum as he moved about, his presence a soothing balm on my troubled soul. The letter had changed everything. It felt like Grandpa had reached out from beyond to share a secret that he had kept hidden all these years. I clutched it tightly, the paper crinkling under my fingertips as I returned to the cozy study where he used to sit in his worn leather chair, reading or working on his countless projects. The letter was cryptic, typical of Grandpa. He never did like doing things the straightforward way. He enjoyed puzzles and mysteries, always with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. His message pointed to a place in the house that I knew by heart, yet it suggested another layer to the home that was hidden in plain view. The idea of a secret chamber, known only to me, was thrilling and terrifying. What could it contain? Why would he hide it from everyone but me? I sat in his old chair, feeling the warmth of his influence even in his absence, and tried to decode the message. The instructions were interwoven with references to our time together, enigmas only I could unpick. As I studied the riddle, memories of our treasure hunts played in my mind. Grandpa loved creating games that took me through the house, following clues, learning its every nook and cranny. It was during those games that he had instilled in me a love for stories and secrets, preparing me, perhaps unknowingly, for this very moment. I began my search in the study, the heart of Grandpa's intellectual world. Books lined the walls, each one painstakingly cataloged and remembered. As a child, I'd reach for the brightly colored ones on the lower shelves, lying at his feet as he told stories from memory. Now I approached them with new eyes, searching for a sign, a crack, a shift I hadn't noticed before. The letter hinted at something aligned with wisdom, though hidden behind fiction's guise. It sounded like a clue that suggested the extensive library. I scanned the spines of the books, feeling for anything out of the ordinary. My fingers landed on a tome that seemed ill-placed, slightly askew amongst the rest. It was an old, leather-bound volume, the kind Grandpa favored. Its spine was unmarked, no title to give away its contents. I tugged it gently, and like a scene from an old adventure movie, the shelf moved, rotating slowly to reveal a narrow passageway. The air that seeped from the opening was cool and carried a faint scent of earth and time. My heart raced with both anticipation and trepidation as I peered inside. A small light, flickering with age, illuminated a tight corridor leading deeper into the house. I hesitated briefly, thinking of my parents and their dismissive regard for this place, and for the man who had held it so dear. They would never understand, nor would they care. For them, Grandpa's house was just a property to be sold, devoid of the life and history it held. I steeled myself and stepped through, entering a world known to only Grandpa and me. The corridor was lined with wooden paneling, its surface worn and smooth to the touch. I moved slowly, afraid to disturb the dust that lay undisturbed over the years. At the end, the walls gave way to a small, windowless room. Inside, there was a sturdy oak table, piled with papers and journals, each one filled with Grandpa's familiar handwriting. The room was a haven, a place where, I imagined, he had spent countless hours immersed in thought. It was also filled with artifacts from his explorations, things he had gathered over the years, stories of his life unvoiced. The most arresting sight, however, was a large painting resting against the far wall. Covered by a faded cloth, its presence dominated the room. My fingers trembled as I pulled away the fabric, revealing an awe-inspiring landscape painted in the signature strokes I recognized from the few paintings Grandpa had allowed us to display. This one, however, was truly remarkable in its beauty, and its depiction of a place I had never seen, but that seemed strangely familiar. As the dust settled around me, I realized the scene before me wasn't just a work of art. It was a doorway into Grandpa's thoughts, a reflection of his dreamscape. Sitting beside the painting was a sealed envelope, my name inscribed in Grandpa's elegant script. My throat tightened as I opened it, unveiling another piece of his legacy. The letter inside was tender, filled with words he perhaps couldn't bring himself to say in life. He spoke of dreams, of regrets, and of hopes for a future I was now part of. He spoke of the house, imploring me to see beyond its walls and into the stories they held. "Emma," he wrote, "there are truths best left uncovered until the time is right. I trust you to know when that time is." I sat there for long hours, the room slowly growing darker. The magnitude of what I had discovered was overwhelming, and yet I felt a profound sense of relief. Grandpa had entrusted me with a part of himself he had shared with no one else. It was a weight, but it was also a gift. As evening settled, I left the secret room, carefully closing the passage behind me. The house felt different now, its familiar shadows playing with my perceptions. The knowledge of its hidden depths warmed me. I carried Grandpa's legacy in my heart, knowing that whatever I decided to do with it would be right. In the days that followed, I resumed sorting through the house, infusing new life into forgotten spaces. The secret room beckoned me often, a sanctuary where I could escape the outside world's pressures and reconnect with Grandpa. All the while, the decision of when to reveal its existence, or if I ever would, weighed on my mind. I could endure the waiting, hold the silence, because I understood now more than ever the power that lay within the walls. Over the years, I had learned to navigate through the unjust circumstances of life with a quiet resilience. It was a skill honed, perhaps, by observing my parents' machinations and by the wisdom left behind by Grandpa. My parents, Harold and Janet, were not inherently malicious, but they were blinded by their ambitions and the allure of wealth, often forgetting the human elements that Grandpa cherished. Growing up, I had countless opportunities to witness their disregard for the things Grandpa held dear. There were moments, particularly in my teenage years, when I could have spoken out, could have voiced my opposition but chose not to, believing perhaps naively that in keeping the peace lay my own kind of strength. My silence back then wasn't born of fear, but from a deep-seated hope that actions speak louder than words. I remember vividly one autumn afternoon when I was about 16. We were all gathered in Grandpa's garden, the sun heavy and golden as it dipped toward the horizon. Grandpa was proud of his garden. He had tended to it with the same care and attention he gave to everything in his life. That day, he wanted to show off the new greenhouse he'd built to extend his cultivation season. As we walked through rows of lush vegetables and vibrant flowers, Grandpa shared tales of his past, each plant seemingly tied to a particular memory. He showed us a rare heirloom tomato plant he'd nurtured for years. His eyes sparkled with the same light they had in every story he told. But my father's impatience was evident. "Dad," Harold interrupted with a roll of his eyes, "it's just a tomato. Maybe it's time you realize there are bigger things in the world than a few old plants. Consider moving somewhere more practical, somewhere easier." Grandpa simply smiled, the deep lines of his face crinkling with warmth and understanding. "This garden is as much a part of this family as any of us, Harold," he replied gently. "It's about nurturing life, about memories. You may find worth in bigger things, but don't underestimate the power of the small." Janet stood beside Harold, nodding along, more focused on the materials of the greenhouse than the legacy it represented. I stayed silent, a pang of anger briefly rising, but soon quelled by the scene before me. Grandpa's kindness and patience reminded me that sometimes silence could speak volumes. I didn't need to protest loudly to resonate with what Grandpa valued. Years later, when Grandpa was moved into a nursing home, I saw the dismissal in my parents' eyes. To them, it was the closing of a chapter they were tired of reading. Harold was eager to finalize decisions about Grandpa's property, already dreaming of what could be done with the land once Grandpa passed. Janet, quite frankly, seemed relieved at not having to tiptoe around his quirky habits any longer. When Grandpa passed away, the duty of sorting his belongings fell to me, not by formal appointment, but more because my parents thought it a trivial favor beneath their attention. They were already considering the potential of the estate, their minds calculating potential profits rather than cherishing the invaluable personal history tied to each corner of the house. One particular incident stood out, an affront my parents might not have considered as such, but which I could never forget. I had found an old family album, its leather-bound pages thick with history. Trembling fingers leafed through century-old photographs, stories captured in sepia tones and faded ink. "Why keep all this clutter?" Janet remarked carelessly when she stumbled upon me, the album open on my lap. I looked up at her, her expression a mask of simple curiosity rather than any malice. "This clutter," I said softly, "is our story." But she barely heard me, or perhaps chose not to understand. Her mind was elsewhere, on brighter futures unmarred by the weight of the past. I wondered often if they ever grasped the essence of what Grandpa tried to teach us. That value was not always tangible or immediately apparent. That sometimes a quiet life, a hidden room, or the ripe fruit of an old tomato vine held greater significance than the loudest accolades of wealth. Grandpa's philosophy was embedded within that very secret I had uncovered. Yet I knew not whether my parents could ever truly fathom its depth. Looking around the house now, each object, each piece of forgotten bric-a-brac, seemed to whisper stories of resilience and love, waiting for someone to listen. Everything seemed charged with a presence that resonated with all I'd learned from Grandpa. An understanding that one's life and its imprint could be as secretive as it was influential. In that silence was a power I had yet to reveal, a potential that lay dormant but steadily growing. Even as my parents continued in their ignorance, I held my newfound understanding close. In time, I would know when to speak, when to let this secret change everything. Until then, I would keep nurturing the life Grandpa believed in, much like his cherished garden that somehow continues to bloom despite everything. As I walked through Grandpa's house, I felt a strange stillness settle over me. It was as if the very air in each room held its breath in anticipation, waiting for a moment of revelation. I traced my fingers over the dusty surfaces, every speck of dust a testament to the time that had passed since I'd last been here. Though I had kept coming back to the house after Grandpa's passing, today felt different. Each creak of the wooden floorboards beneath my feet whispered of the memories held within these walls, tucked away in the folds of a life lived fully, but humbly. The sunlight poured through the cracked windows, casting long shadows that stretched like ghosts of yesterday's dreams across the faded wallpaper. I found myself drawn to his old study, a sanctuary of sorts during the summers I used to spend here. The moment I crossed its threshold, I was greeted by the musty scent of worn leather and aged paper, a comforting embrace of nostalgia. The room was full of the remnants of a life lived thoughtfully. Books upon books, stacked on shelves that reached to a ceiling my younger self had always thought infallibly tall. Sitting down at his weathered desk, I let my eyes wander over the scattered papers and open ledgers. Grandpa had been meticulous in his accounts, noting every cent with a precision that spoke not just of necessity, but of a respect for the simplicity of life. It was then that my gaze fell upon a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. Instinctively, I opened it, and the familiar rhythm of his handwriting leapt out at me from the pages. There were records of weather patterns and crops tilled, but interspersed amongst these details were reflections on family and life, simple yet profound observations that captured moments of clarity. My heart skipped as a slip of paper fell from between the pages, fluttering to the ground like a lost secret seeking attention. Kneeling, I picked it up. It was neatly folded, and as I unfolded it, I saw a short note written in his hand. Sometimes the most hidden paths lead to the most treasured places. Look beyond what you see. The cryptic message tugged at me with a force I couldn't quite explain. There was a sense of urgency encapsulated in those words, a promise of discovery. I closed the journal gently, contemplating the mystery that Grandpa seemed to have left behind. It struck me then, a moment of clarity amidst the nostalgia. His house, much like himself, held more beneath its surface, stories and secrets waiting to be uncovered. This feeling was only strengthened by the memory of his quiet wisdom and the rare moments when he'd let slip a quip or observation that would resonate long after the conversation had passed. As I continued to sift through the study, my fingers grazed over a small, almost imperceptible notch on the underside of the desk. It was a subtle inconsistency in the smooth wood, a discrepancy that seemed intentional rather than accidental. Intrigued, I pressed against it gently. There was a soft click, and the panel of a nearby bookshelf eased outward. Stunned, I moved to it, revealing a narrow passageway hidden behind the shelves. A wave of disbelief and excitement washed over me. Here was something no one else had discovered, an echo of Grandpa's life that had been concealed in plain sight. The air beyond the doorway was cooler, untouched by the warmth of the sun and time seemingly forgotten. My heart raced as I took a tentative step forward, eager to delve into the mystery Grandpa had left for me. The walls were lined with more shelves, and on these were rows and rows of notebooks, documents, and trinkets that looked like they belonged to another era altogether. There, nestled amongst the stacks, was another journal, smaller and more worn than the first. As I opened its pages, Grandpa's voice seemed to narrate every line. The notes were not merely personal reflections. They were observations, ideas, and dreams that spoke of aspirations beyond the farming life we all assumed he was content with. There were sketches, blueprints perhaps, of systems and apparatuses too intricate for me to comprehend immediately, but intriguing nonetheless. For as long as I could remember, my parents had viewed Grandpa as a simple man, a farmer content with the life he'd carved out in this corner of the world. Yet, what lay before me painted the picture of a thinker, a doer who had dared to imagine beyond the horizon visible to his contemporaries. As I read on, I understood that he had mapped out ideas for inventions and improvements, ways to better the land, to conserve energy, to nurture growth with the environment rather than against it. Keeping this hidden made sense now. It was a knowledge not yet meant for those who couldn't comprehend or appreciate its worth. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This was his legacy, intricately woven and safeguarded with care. The passage he carved out led not just to a space of physical exploration, but to an understanding of who he had truly been. Resolving to honor what he had kept secret for so long, I realized that this was where the quiet strength drew from. Understanding the depths of a legacy presented not only as a gift, but as a duty. Re-steeling my resolve, I acknowledged the enormity of carrying forth what Grandpa had believed in. Amidst the silence of that secret room, with only the soft flutter of pages turning, I made a silent promise to keep nurturing his vision, to let it flourish as silently and strongly as Grandpa's beloved garden. Grandpa's house became a sanctuary for my thoughts and planning. I found myself there more often than not, dusting off the cobwebs of neglect and unlocking secrets hidden in the folds of time. Every visit was accompanied by rituals of quiet contemplation. Each book read, each document scrutinized, was a step into my grandpa's shoes, shadowed in the mystery of his unspoken life. I knew I couldn't rush into decisions. This required patience, a slow nurturing of understanding before any action could be taken. So, I started with small steps, meticulously cataloging the items in the secret room. Each artifact, each piece of paper, held a story that needed unraveling. The initial chaos of dust-covered shelves transformed into an ordered repository, each item waiting for its tale to be told. Grandpa's old notebooks were particularly revealing. They were filled with sketches, equations, and musings of a mind that had never ceased to explore. His thoughts weaved through philosophy, technical diagrams, and shared experiences, painting a picture of a person much larger than the quiet man I'd known. I realized that there was a method to his life's madness, a journey of understanding that he had embarked on long before I ever thought to. Days turned into weeks, and I found solace in the rhythm of discovery. My resolve strengthened with each piece of the puzzle that found its place. But I was still a stranger walking along these pages, making sense of the man he had been and the weighty legacy he entrusted to me. What was once a box of memories had become a ticking curiosity, urging me to find the right moment to reveal its existence. Keeping all these plans discreet became an exercise in itself. My parents were none the wiser. Their preoccupations with their lives elsewhere meant my regular absences went unquestioned. If they had any inkling of the treasures contained within Grandpa's old house, they never spoke of it. They were wrapped up in their own concerns, turning a blind eye to a deeper world burgeoning under their noses. As weeks passed, the need for an ally became imperative. Someone with whom I could share this secret, one who could provide a new perspective or insight. Turning to my closest confidant, Mira, I spoke of the hidden room for the first time. Mira's eyes widened in disbelief, a testament to the secret life my grandfather had so meticulously concealed. But also, to my relief, there was an instant and mutual understanding, an eagerness to explore the quiet depths of this newfound responsibility alongside me. Mira's involvement proved pivotal. Where I saw method and complexity, she unearthed connections and potential. Her analytical mind was the perfect counterpart to my emotional attachment. We devised a plan, cautious and steady, ensuring that we would do justice to what Grandpa held dear. She suggested legal consultations, a prudent step to ensure that what we found could be safeguarded from any unwanted scrutiny or claim. Quiet preparations unfolded over months. Mira and I approached a trusted legal advisor subtly, stating a hypothetical inquiry into the handling of unexpected inheritances. We sought guidance on how best to protect intellectual property. Our advisor, a seasoned and discreet professional, was both intrigued and careful, laying out steps that required further documentation, validation of ownership, and possible protective patents. The process, though long and meticulous, was imbued with a quiet excitement, a hope that we were crafting a future in alignment with whatever Grandpa had envisioned. The deeper we delved, the clearer it became that this was not just about protecting Grandpa's genius. It was about shaping what we found into something that could interact with the world, subtly and gently, much like the man we wished to honor. There was a strange solace in the methodical approach, our visits to the house echoing with purpose and shared resolve. Throughout, my presence at family gatherings remained a balancing act. Every shared meal or conversation, another lesson in maintaining composure and normalcy. And all the while, I listened intently to my parents. Their lives devoid of Grandpa's legacy echoed with a lack of understanding or care for anything beyond their immediate needs. The notion of confronting them with the truth felt premature. They weren't ready, and perhaps neither was I. Even so, it became increasingly challenging to mask the fire that burnt beneath the surface. The anticipation of revelations swirled within me, a constant reminder of the responsibility I'd chosen. Each day, the plans firmed up, and each night was one step closer to the moment I would unveil the fruits of our labor, a quiet triumph that had grown far beyond a legacy hidden behind walls. For now, silence remained my ally. The quiet preparation unfolded in measured steps, rightful and deliberate, as though guided by an unseen hand. All the while, the image of my grandfather's gentle nod and knowing smile lingered, keeping me on track, veering neither too fast nor too far. Together with Mira, and driven by the quiet pride inured by Grandpa's secret door, we stayed the course. Careful, quiet, and strong, we journeyed onward toward a future tempered by patience and perseverance. The day of the ceremony arrived like a thief in the night, stealthy and unexpected despite all preparations. The air was heavy with expectation, a mix of excitement and underlying tension that stuck to the room like an uninvited guest. It was a gala, one of those dazzling charity events my parents loved to host, resonating with laughter and clinking glasses, all for the facade of a good cause. I could almost taste the anticipation in the air, electrifying and pungent like charged ozone before a storm. My parents, the grand orchestrators of the evening, moved through the crowd with practiced grace. Their smiles were performances perfected over years, reserved for those they deemed worthy of their attention. My father, gripped by ambition and a thirst for approval, took every compliment on the grandeur of the event with a satisfied nod, while my mother played the attentive hostess, her charm a delicate dance of calculated warmth. They hadn't noticed me slip away quietly. I found a corner where the shadows were a comforting cloak, allowing me to observe unseen. This was their world, all flashing smiles and glittering eyes, and tonight was no different, save for one pivotal detail hidden from them. In the grand hall, each element was deliberately curated. Tables adorned with fragrant white roses, chandeliers casting warm, diffused light, and a marbled floor gleaming underfoot. My fingers brushed the hidden seam in my dress pocket nervously, touching the documents that felt weightier than they should in such an atmosphere. Mira had helped me prepare everything. Her wisdom and clarity were invaluable, her steady encouragement the anchor I needed in rough tides. As the evening wore on, I watched my parents draw toward the central stage, prepared to deliver yet another of their polished speeches. They relished these moments, the center of attention, the applause, though tonight the spotlight would reveal something they had never anticipated. When my father coughed lightly into the microphone to silence the room, I felt a surge of quiet resolve. It was time. I emerged from my shadows as he began to speak, my footsteps measured and deliberate. The sound of my heels clicking across the marble was a drumbeat in my chest, joining the tempo of my quickening heart. People turned as I approached the stage, Curiosity etched across a sea of familiar faces. My mother's eyes followed me with an irritable, searching glance, as if sensing an unscheduled change in the program. "Thank you for being here tonight," my father's voice boomed, oblivious to the scene unfolding. "It is because of your generous contributions that we continue to make a difference." His words faded into a quiet murmur in my ears as I drew alongside him. For a brief moment our eyes met, and I could see the surprise flare into anger. He struggled to keep his composure, the practiced calm he wore like a second skin fracturing briefly. My mother looked as if she had swallowed a sour cherry, her poised demeanor threatened by my unexpected arrival. I didn't give them a chance to recall their command of the situation. Taking the microphone, I addressed the room, my voice steady, but laden with the gravity of what was to come. "Tonight, we gather here in honor of a cause, one that binds us through our shared desire to give back. However, there is something important I must share." I paused, allowing the tension to gather, like storm clouds ready to unleash their load. "Many of you may not know, but my grandfather, a man who devoted his life to quiet acts of generosity, was overlooked in his later years. After his passing, I discovered something about him, about who he was, and what he valued." Silence wrapped around the gathering, a collective breath held in waiting. I reached into my pocket, withdrew the papers, and opened them with deliberate care. The crisp sound sliced through the stillness of the room. What I found was a legacy of giving that surpasses anything we do here tonight. A legacy built not on the public stage, but through the lives he touched in private. My eyes swept over the crowd, then settled on my parents, whose expressions had hardened into unreadable masks. "Ladies and gentlemen, everything you see here tonight, every dime that gives this evening its sparkle, originated from his investments, now revealed in full transparency." Murmurs rippled across the room, whispers like a sudden breeze weaving through the crowd. My parents stood frozen, the weight of my words pinning their grandeur to the marble floor. I handed copies of the documents to a nearby attendant, instructed to distribute them among the guests. Grandfather's meticulous accounts, his letters of intent, all declared for the world to see. "This is his contribution," I concluded, my voice gentle yet firm, as if welcoming home some lost truth. "And it is through his quiet triumph that we shall continue to celebrate, honoring the ethos he lived by." The attendant moved through the crowd, the papers dispersing like seeds cast into fertile soil. Eyes scanned quickly, some with disbelief, others with admiration, realizing the quiet power contained in my grandfather's unseen legacy. My father's face had paled, his carefully constructed facade cracking as comprehension dawned. He looked at me like a man tracing the edges of a new reality he couldn't yet grasp. My mother's lips were pressed into a thin line. For once, words failed her. As the document circulated, a ripple of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing, a swelling wave of appreciation, not for my parents' spectacle, but for Grandpa's lasting impact. The acknowledgement he deserved had finally arrived, resonating through the grand hall, an echo of silent strength. I stepped down from the stage, the applause following me like a loyal shadow. My heart was steady, the burden of secrecy lifted, replaced by something uplifting and affirming. In that pivotal moment, the storm had passed, leaving clarity and resolve in its wake. For tonight, my parents and their hollow facades were laid bare. For once, they were not the architects of their own narrative. Instead, they stood amongst it, part of a story that eclipsed them, forged by a man whose quiet dignity guided him more surely than their public acclaim ever could. And for me, the quiet triumph was complete. illuminated by the truth I had finally shared. After the ceremony, the crowd began to disperse, and the once vibrant hall slowly quieted down, leaving behind an echo of murmured conversations and the soft pats of footsteps on polished wood floors. I noticed my parents standing near one of the exits, engaged in a hushed conversation. The expressions they wore were inscrutable, a blend of discomfort and forced civility, masks they had perfected over the years. I made my way toward them, my presence acknowledged with a slight nod from my father and a tight-lipped smile from my mother. The accolades I had received for Grandpa's legacy seemed to weigh on them heavily, as if they were unprepared for the shift in spotlight, from their carefully curated reputations to the raw, unadorned truth of my grandfather's life and the legacy he left behind. As I approached, my mother spoke up, her voice smooth yet tinged with a strain I recognized all too well. "That was quite the speech, dear. Your grandfather would have been proud," she said, the compliment sounding more obligatory than heartfelt. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. It was important that people knew the real story. My father cleared his throat, a habitual prelude to when he was about to say something key. "This ceremony was enlightening," he admitted, though his words lacked the warmth of genuine admiration. "Enlightening for everyone," I added, allowing a touch of firmness to seep into my voice. I wanted them to know that this was no longer a narrative they could manage or manipulate. Grandpa's story had been my gift to him, and, by extension, to myself. A reclamation of truth over perception. They exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them that I was not privy to, and for a moment, I wondered what they were thinking. The facade of control they had always maintained appeared to waver in the face of the revelation I had presented. There was an awkward pause, the kind that occurs when there are too many unspoken words hanging in the air. I decided to break it with something I hoped would resonate with the better angels of their nature, if such still existed. "You know, I found a lot of things in Grandpa's house. Not just the door, but memories. Pieces of him I'd never fully understood before." My mother's eyes flickered, a brief spark of curiosity struggling against her stoic demeanor. "What kind of things?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Letters, photographs, even his journals," I replied, noting the shift in her posture as I mentioned the journals. She had always been concerned with how our family's image was maintained and controlled, and the idea of Grandpa's private thoughts coming to light seemed to unsettle her. My father, however, remained impassive. "Your grandfather was a complex man," he stated, as if the simplicity of the sentence could encapsulate a life of quiet yet profound significance. "Yes, he was," I agreed, "and I think I've only just begun to understand just how much more there is to his story. And to ours. For too long, we've let the surface define us." They both fell silent, absorbing my words. For the first time in a long while, it seemed we were standing on the same ground, albeit reluctantly, and facing the undeniable fact that some truths are immune to the fear of exposure. Without another word, I turned from them, feeling a sense of closure that had eluded me for years. I had nothing left to prove to them, and perhaps they too realized that the burden of facade they had carried did more harm than good. As I walked away, I caught sight of Mrs. Thompson, an old friend of Grandpa's, sitting quietly in a corner of the hall. Her presence was a gentle balm amidst the evening's tensions. I approached her, grateful for the familiarity of her kind smile. "You did wonderfully," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "Your grandfather would have been deeply touched." "Thank you," I responded, taking a seat beside her. "It feels like this is only the beginning, though. There's so much more to uncover and understand." She nodded, her eyes shining with the wisdom of someone who had lived through her own trials. "Life has a way of revealing things in due time, and your grandfather knew that better than anyone. He always said patience is the guardian of truth. Yes, he did, I replied, remembering the many times he had imparted those very words. It was a sentiment he had lived by, one I aspired to embrace myself. We sat in companionable silence for a while, each of us lost in our thoughts, yet connected by the memory of a man who had touched our lives profoundly. The evening's revelations had forged anew my resolve to honor his memory, not just in public acknowledgments, but in how I lived my own life, with integrity, patience, and unyielding truth. Eventually, as the hall grew emptier and the lights began to dim, I stood to leave, feeling Mrs. Thompson's gentle squeeze on my hand as a farewell and a blessing. "Take care, dear," she said with a smile that warmed me from within. "You too," I replied, my heart full as I made my way to the exit. Outside, the cool night air embraced me, a refreshing contrast to the event's earlier tensions. I stood beneath the stars, breathing deeply, feeling the gravity of the day settle softly around me. I had stepped into a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty yet illuminated by the clarity of truth. And as I walked toward my car, the words of my mentor echoed quietly within, a steady anthem for the road ahead. Patience is the guardian of truth. It was a lesson Grandpa had lived, and one I was ready to embrace with my whole heart. As the night drew silent around me, broken only by the distant hum of traffic, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since Grandpa's passing. The revelation of the secret door and the treasures it contained had upended everything I thought I knew, challenging me to view my family and history through an entirely new lens. That night, alone in my room with the moon casting a silver glow, I opened the old leather-bound journal once again. Its pages, filled with Grandpa's meticulous handwriting, were more than just a record of his life. They were an intimate conversation across time. Each entry resonated with patience and wisdom, quietly urging me to understand the depth of the choice he had placed before me. His last entries had taken on a different tone. They were rawer, almost as if he sensed his time was nearing an end. He wrote not of regrets, but of hopes, a future he wished for me forged from truth and courage. He didn't want to burden me with the secret, but he wanted to leave me better equipped to protect what truly mattered. Closing the journal, I turned my attention to the legal documents I'd started processing. In them lay the legal evidence that would pave a new path, separating me from a family dynamic that had suffocated both Grandpa and me in its entitlement and disregard for genuine connection. The house was mine, but more than that, his legacy, comprised of memories, values, and love, now truly belonged to me. The days after the ceremonial uproar settled into a rhythm of gentle acceptance. Communication with my parents became distant, not brusquely cut off, but tapered by necessity. They had called once with expressions of surprise and wounded indignance mixed in their voices. My mother's words jarring as they flitted between disbelief and an attempt to reclaim moral high ground. "We trusted you to look after things. How could you let it all slip away?" But my grandfather's gentle reminder, his echo of love and patience, strengthened my resolve. Sometimes guarding the truth means letting go of what isn't right. Her words no longer had the power they once wielded over me. It was not a matter of revenge, but rather of finally being able to stand tall in a story that was authentically mine. Still, it was not just about houses and inheritances. There was an emotional terrain I needed to traverse, pathways lit by the memories Grandpa and I shared. Weekends of fishing by the lake, evenings spent piecing together jigsaw puzzles in cozy silence, and his stories that painted the tapestry of his life during the most challenging times. They all spoke of resilience and quiet strength. These moments were the real inheritance, gifts that were unfolding within me as I navigated this uncharted terrain. I spent long afternoons restoring the house, wanting to respect Grandpa's history while imprinting it with my own. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper stories long forgotten, yet never truly lost. And in the slow process of peeling back layers of paint, I reconstructed not just the physical walls, but the emotional structure of something I could call home. A few months passed before I met Mrs. Thompson again. She had become somewhat of a pillar in this transition. Her presence reminded me of Grandpa in ways that were comforting and reassuring. Over tea, I shared with her the bits and pieces of my journey, and she listened intently, occasionally offering insights that made the complexities of familial bonds and personal growth less daunting. "Your grandfather was a man of foresight," she remarked softly. "He saw potential in you, not because he hoped for some legacy tale, but because he trusted you to make it your own." Her words stayed with me, aligning seamlessly with my mentor's and Grandpa's guiding wisdom. They became my mantra as I navigated this newfound independence and sense of identity. I found myself relishing the solitude at times, a peaceful contrast to the chaotic upheavals of the past months. There were nights when I would wander through the house, fingers trailing along the banisters, contemplating the future. Not in a rush, not with any fear, but with an excited anticipation akin to the moments before dawn, when the world hovers at the brink of a new day full of possibility. Eventually, my father reached out, not with accusations or demands, but with a quiet request. He wanted to visit the house, to see the place he had left behind, and perhaps, in his way, to confront the shadows of choices that had led us all to this juncture. When the day came, he walked through the door with a tentative air, a man weathered by time, perhaps now noticing the silent echoes of the years. We spoke little, meandering through rooms that had once echoed with his youthful laughter, and later with the solemn lessons of a demanding patriarch. It was in the library, amidst the shelves lined with well-thumbed books, that he paused, hesitating. "There's so much I didn't understand. About him, about you. I've been wrong," he murmured, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to settle the air around us. In that moment, the words Grandpa had written so painstakingly in his journal surfaced, reminding me of the truths we carry and the ones we leave behind when seeking growth. I looked at my father, his features softened by an unspoken apology, and offered a nod of understanding. The journey of our fractured family was far from over, but within those walls, I felt the beginning of something I had once thought impossible. A tentative healing, emerging not from triumph over others, but from a shared acknowledgement of truth and the silent, steady strength of love. As I stood beneath the glowing moon that night, I realized that patience, and its enduring companion, understanding, might truly be the strongest guardians we have. In solitude, I felt Grandpa's presence gently caressing the edges of my consciousness, an enduring warmth that held me steady. Sitting on the porch of my grandfather's house, I gazed up at the night sky. Moonlight filtered through the dark clouds, brushing the rooftops of our town's quiet neighborhood. The air carried the familiar scent of night-blooming violets, which always took me back to childhood, when Grandfather and I would sit here, quietly discussing his stories. Now this porch had become my refuge, a place where I could think through everything that had happened. Grandfather's house, once full of warm memories, had become a place where new truths were uncovered, truths long hidden behind years of family secrets. My gaze lingered on the part of the garden where we had discovered the secret door. It had opened not only physically but metaphorically as well, revealing something important and meaningful. As I sat there, my thoughts kept returning to what Grandfather had said about life, family, and what truly matters. He spoke often about the need to see people as they really are, not as they wish to appear. Only now was I beginning to understand how important that was. Our journey through life is not only about striving for something external, but also about a deep awareness of what lies within. Father was still inside the house, no doubt mulling over everything Grandfather had written in his diary. He needed time to understand his role in all of this, just as I did. The complicated feelings I had toward him began gradually to dissolve, giving way to understanding and compassion. After all, sometimes all we need is for someone to open those doors we have long avoided. I remembered grandfather's words. What matters isn't how many times you get knocked down, but how you stand up and keep going. These simple truths, which he had repeated countless times over cups of tea, now held far greater meaning for me. Somewhere deep inside, I felt his resilience and conviction flowing through me, a personal legacy passed from him to me, graceful and quiet, yet all-encompassing. Not long ago, I would have called our current situation chaotic and sad, but now I understood that it was simply part of the natural cycle of life. Sometimes, in order to put back together what has long been broken, you have to pass through pain and misunderstanding. Along this path, we leave behind our fears and resentments, replacing them with mutual understanding and love. My soul found peace, and suddenly I felt tears quietly streaming down my cheeks. They were not tears of grief or fear, but rather of joy at the new awareness I had found. They reflected how much it meant to be at peace with myself and to remember who I am, thanks to grandfather and everything he had taught me. I got up and went inside to find father, who was quietly turning the pages of grandfather's diary. My voice carried like a warm wave across the room. Dad, I think grandfather knew. He knew that things would only change for us when we ourselves were ready. He looked up at me, and in his eyes flickered that same spark I had once seen in grandfather's. We were walking a path that led us in the right direction, and perhaps, for the first time, we were not afraid of each other. This was grandfather's true legacy, a love free of pretense and lies, full of openness and honesty. I went into the bedroom where grandfather had once lived. On the desk sat his glasses and the old lamp he had loved so much. It was on, bathing the room in a soft, warm light. I sat on the bed, opened the diary again, and began to read. Each word was both a farewell and a greeting. At last I understood that freedom is not the absence of responsibility, but the chance to build your life honestly and sincerely. Before leaving, I looked around once more, noting how every object in that room, a book, a painting, an armchair, carried traces of grandfather's life. His presence surrounded me, as though leaving me forever protected. Now I knew that everything would be all right. Our journey was only beginning, and although the road ahead was long, I felt sure of myself. That night was not simply the culmination of past events, it was a beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, cleansed of grievances and misunderstandings. A chapter in which only love could reign. With a full heart and a calm soul, I looked out the window, where the first glimmers of dawn were breaking. The world was beginning to wake, and with it, a new hope was being born. If you ever find yourself face to face with difficult circumstances, know that true resolution begins within you. Turn for support to those you love, and find your strength in honesty and awareness. The road may be hard, but in the end, isn't that what we all strive for? Answers found through feeling and through time?